I did turn this lamp off, but the way the sun is shining, it looks so illuminated, so have fun with that. Hello, welcome back to my channel, everybody. We are going to jump right into my September reading wrap-up because I read 26 books in September, so I'm gonna do my best to not ramble on about most of them. I might if it's like one of my favorites that I read this month, but I'm really gonna try to be good and focused and get through this list in under an hour. Under 50 minutes would be amazing. So let's get started. To start with, this feels like so long ago, but I listened to Light from Uncommon Stars by Ryka Aoki. Ryka Aoki. This was a really interesting book that was kind of a mix of like sci-fi and literary and fantasy. Yeah, it was kind of all over the place. We kind of follow three main characters. Our first is a young teenager. She is transgender. She's a violinist. She has run away from home due to the abuse that she is going through there. And she meets one of our other main characters who is a like violin teacher to the stars. Basically, like she's the one who teaches the best of the best violinists in the world. And we learn very early on that this woman has sold her soul to the devil, but then she kind of didn't want that to happen, and so they struck up a bargain where if she could find the devil 7 souls, then she would be free of her not bond, but like their like deal. And so the 6 students that she's had so far have all ended up losing their soul to the devil, and she just needs one more student. She has like a year left before the end of the time they were given. I think it was like 49 years because it was 7 years for each student. So she has a year to find this last student, and she comes across our teenager in the park. You know, she's sleeping on a bench because she has nowhere else to go. So they kind of strike up this relationship of teacher-student. The third character in this book, their story is kind of woven in throughout until closer to the end, but it is an alien who has traveled to Earth from some other planet or galaxy. Like there was trouble in their own home planet, there was war, there's lots of things, so she escaped with her family, and they've landed on Earth, and they have taken over a donut shop, which they're kind of using as their cover while they're preparing their spaceship for the next leg of their journey. And so all of these people kind of become intertwined together. I thought it was actually pretty successful for how much the author was trying to do. There's a lot happening there. You know, we're following kind of the angst and the who am I and the where do I fit into this world of this young teenager. We're dealing with this violin teacher who's kind of dealing with the ramifications of the decisions she made 50 years ago. We're dealing with this alien who really is just trying to protect her family, but the decisions she makes to do that sometimes are questionable. And so there's also, again, there's this sci-fi element because there's spaceships and aliens. There's some fantasy with this like dealing with the devil situation. It's very literary in its writing style. And so it could, I think, have felt a lot less cohesive than it did. And I do not think this book will work for most people unless you kind of really enjoy all of those genres and want to read a book that's kind of all of them. I did enjoy it. I think I gave it a 4.25 stars. Yeah, 4.25, so pretty highly rated. And I thought the audiobook was really well done also. The next book that I read was an ARC. It's called The House on Graveyard Lane by Martin Edwards. This one did not work for me. It's possible that it's because it's like several books into a series, and it's the first one that I read when I requested the ARC. I didn't realize it was the first in a series. I don't know if I just missed that or if it wasn't super clear. But I think potentially this series isn't for me in general. I could not stand the main detective woman, because it's a series about a woman who solves murders and mysteries. And she was insufferable. I could not stand it. I don't mind an unlikable character or an insufferable character, but this one, it feels like you're just supposed to believe she has zero flaws and she's super perfect, and I just could not stand her. A lot of the other characters as well, I really did not enjoy reading from or about. I potentially, again, because this is like third or fourth or fifth in a series, the way that the author kind of named people were set in like early 1900s England, in kind of the upper classes. At least a lot of this story was set in that. So everyone has their full name, their last name, their school nickname, their friend's name. Like, everybody had so many different names, and they were referred to by a different name on every page, it felt like. So it was really difficult to kind of keep track of them, especially because in this book, a lot of the side characters felt really similar to me. And I felt like it took me well past the halfway point to fully feel like I had a handle on who was who and what was going on. And then the biggest issue for me is that we are told, like in the very first couple of pages, what the mystery is going to be. A woman literally walks up to our main character and says, "I need you to solve my murder," and then she dies in the first chapter. Amazing, let's figure that out. It is hardly touched on in the book, and then I felt like when it was solved, it was sort of like a one-page thing, and then it wasn't really talked about again. So basically the investigation into that woman's death, it opened up this can of worms of other things that became the main plot of the story and mystery of the story, but I didn't feel like that was well done. And so it was just so confusing, because the whole time I was like, I don't understand what this has to do with this initial mystery. So unfortunately not for me. I will not be reading any more in the series, and that's fine. I unfortunately gave this one 2 stars. I'm going to talk about the next 3 very quickly. I read Paladin's Strength, Paladin's Hope, and Paladin's Faith by T. Kingfisher. These are the last 3 in the Saint of Steel series that she's written. I read the first one several months ago. I enjoyed it. It was okay, and that's kind of how I felt about these 3 as well. I think my favorite of the 3 was Paladin's Strength, which is the second book. But the biggest issue that I have with these books is that I do not really enjoy romance-heavy plots. I don't want to read that. I especially really hate the way that it was done here. I kind of have the same issue with all 3 of these books and the first one, which is that they're very romance-forward, and it's the kind of romance that I hate. I don't like most kind of romances, but I really hate this because it's the same in every single one. It's very much pining. It's very much, I'm not good enough. They both are so obviously into each other and won't do anything about it. And by the time I got to the 4th one, I was really over it. And I'm not gonna lie, I was listening to this audiobook really quick to try to get through it. And you might be asking, why did you bother? Here's the thing. I love the worlds that T. Kingfisher writes. I love the other plots in these books. There's something very different, kind of a quest or just a mystery that they're trying to solve, and I love them. I think they're so well done. And I just wish I could have that without the romance that I find boring and predictable, because we all know what's going to happen. Which, again, I know for some people is why they read romance, but I don't enjoy it at all. And so I really struggle with how to rate these books. If you're a T. Kingfisher fan and you do like romance, these I think are an absolute must-read for you. They weren't a must-read for me, which sounds crazy because I literally listened to 3 out of the 4 this month, but audiobooks for me are just kind of something I put on when I'm doing, chores or errands or things, so I could just kind of listen to it whenever. And I don't regret listening to them. They're just not books I think I want to own or ever read again because of the romance plot lines. So these are hard for me. I think I kept rating them lower and lower. I think I got to like a 3.5 by the end of it, which is not a bad book at all. They're just not perfectly for me, which is a bummer because, like I said, I just love the worlds that T. Kingfisher writes. So that's just something to keep in mind if this is something you might be interested in, but for me, they were like just okay. After that, I read Truffle Hound by Rowan Jacobsen, which is a nonfiction about the world of truffles. Maybe I've put it up by now. If I haven't, I am gonna put up my August wrap up at some point. And the last book that I read in August was an arc called Tartufo. That is one of the best books I have read this year. It's a fiction about kind of an Italian town that finds this truffle. And that really sparked my interest in truffle hunting, kind of the world. And then this book came up in my Libby app, and I was like, yes, I'm reading this. And I loved it. It was such a well done nonfiction. It just kept me engaged. It's very much the author traveling the world to all these different places where truffles are found. Because I feel like if you know anything about truffles, you kind of assume, oh, they're pretty much only found in Italy and maybe in France, but they're actually found all across Europe and even some in North America, probably some other places, but those are the main ones that he talked about. And just the, like, all the intricacies of the world. There's like some black market things, there's all these different competing like families and businesses, and I just really loved it. This is like exactly the type of nonfiction that I want to read. I actually did end up buying it, and it's coming any day, and I'm very excited. But definitely one for the nonfiction readers. If you like truffles, if you like, you know, someone just kind of going on a quest to learn about things, this is a perfect book for that. The next book was another arc called The Mask of Merryvale Manor by Pete Sherlock. And this one was pretty good. I rated it 4 stars. It's actually out already because I read it later than I was supposed to. It's kind of a historical fiction with a mystery thrown in. We join our main character on the day of his cousin's wedding. They have kind of been into each other since childhood, and so there's all these conflicting feelings about her getting married to someone else, and so they go kind of to their, like, this lake that was their childhood haunt on the property where the wedding is taking place, and they find a dead body in the lake. And obviously that stirs up an investigation, and so the book is kind of told in a dual timeline, starting back when he was a teenager after his mother died and he was brought by his aunt to live with this family, kind of when he met them, the next couple of years of him just becoming kind of enmeshed in this family. And then in the second timeline, it's present day leading up to the wedding, and then a little bit after, obviously, once we find that. And I actually really enjoyed it. I don't typically love a dual timeline, but this one I felt like was really well executed, and it gets pretty creepy, I'm not gonna lie. And then I was not expecting the ending whatsoever. I don't think it was gonna be a 4 until maybe the last couple of pages, and then that bumped it up to a 4. And I don't really want to say much else about it, because I do think the more you know, the more it will ruin the book for you. So if any of that sounds like something you want to read, like historical fiction set in the, I think it's 1960s, which was something I also really liked about it, because I think most things with the vibe that this book has are very like early 1900s, and so I liked the 1960s, 70s, 80s of it. I thought was really nice and different. So one to try, one to pick up if historical fiction mystery is something for you. I also read the last, I believe it's the last 2 books in the Lady Hardcastle series, A Fire at the Exhibition and An Assassination on the Agenda by T.E. Kinsey. And if you have not heard of the Lady Hardcastle mystery series and you are like a serial mystery reader, you need to pick these up. They are excellent. I think Assassination on the Agenda is like book 11 in the series, so there's a lot to kind of binge and catch up on. But it follows Lady Hardcastle and her lady's maid Flo, or Florence, and they've just moved to this kind of small English town in the beginning of the series. And something that I really enjoy about it is, I don't think this is a spoiler, because I think you learn it pretty early on in the first book. Lady Hardcastle, her husband was an ambassador during the wars at one point, and she was kind of made like a secret agent because of his job, and then Flo was kind of roped into that with her. And then her husband was actually murdered on like a case, and they became like fully secret agents, spies after that. And so this is kind of their retirement. They want to get away from the craziness, but of course things are going to find them. And so what I appreciate is that the books kind of alternate between mysteries and murders that happen kind of in their small village and surrounding towns, and then Lady Hardcastle's brother still works for whatever the British Secret Service is at the time, and so he will still call them and have them come to London or some other places to solve these kind of bigger high-profile cases. So it doesn't feel as stuck in a rut as sometimes you can get with these kind of serial murder mysteries. You're kind of taken all over England to these different settings, and it keeps it really fresh. And I love the relationship between Lady Hardcastle and Flo. They are great. They are wonderful. They don't need a man. So if that's what you want in your murder mystery detectives, these are absolutely ones you should pick up. And I think the series has only gotten better. Both of these are two of my favorites. I don't typically rate these kind of serial murder mystery books higher than like 3.75 because we all know what we're getting. They're not great books typically. They're just kind of cozy mysteries to read when you need a palate cleanser. But I think I rated both of these a 4 or maybe a little higher because I thought they were just so well done and so original. So highly recommend if you have not started this series yet. All right, in September, I also listened to The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Oh my goodness, it's like 50 something hours. I listened at 2 times speed, so it's still about a day's worth of listening. And overall, number one, so glad I've read it. So glad that I have read it and can kind of like contribute to the conversation about it. Was it a perfect book? No. Absolutely not. I'm really tempted to try and find a really good abridged version and read that and see if maybe it's better, because there is a good chunk kind of in the like around the 30% mark that does not need to be there. It slows it down. It becomes a slog. I almost DNF'd it because I just was like, why have we all of a sudden switched our perspective to this random person we don't know anything about? And you do learn who they are and it becomes important to the plot, but I don't think it needed to be told in the way it was. So FYI, if you got to that 30% mark and Franz was introduced and you're like, what are we doing, buddy? You just have to get through it. You just have to get through it because as soon as we get done with him, we really pick up and take off. Okay, the book like goes. So there's that caveat, but it was a really, really good book. Other than that section, it feels like it would have been really hard to pare it down and make it shorter. I think overall, it does a really good job of taking us through the Count's history so you can understand where he came from and why he ended up where he does. You should know, hopefully this is not a spoiler by now, it's a couple hundred years old, that this is a revenge story. But what I didn't realize is that we're also asking the question throughout, is that the right thing to do? Which I thought was really, really interesting. I did not particularly like the Count. I thought he was also kind of insufferable by the end. But again, those questions that are coming up of is this the right thing to do, I felt kind of helped with that. Because again, it felt very real. Absolutely, this could very much be something that someone would do after. I'm trying to be a little vague here in case you haven't read it, but yeah, this might be something you would do for the horrible thing these people did to you that wasn't your fault, you know? So I'm not going to talk about too much. Everybody kind of knows the story. But if you had it on your list and you have been thinking about reading it, I do think it is worth picking up, reading it, having this classic kind of under your belt. So, The Count of Monte Cristo. I also finished, finally in September, Jesus and John Wayne by Kristin Dumas. I started this like 2 years ago, and then I started it again in March. It's taken me a really long time to get through it because I'll be very honest with you, I got really upset every time I would pick it up. And that's because, so the tagline of this book is How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. I grew up in a very, very conservative evangelical family, and I've been kind of working through that and deconstructing that for the past 10 years, 15 years. It's hard to say how long it's been going on now. I still consider myself a Christian, but I don't really have any ties to the evangelical church any longer because I do not think anything about it in its current state is what Christianity was meant to be. And this book this book is the history of how it got to where it is now, kind of starting in the like 20s, 30s America. This is also very US centric, so I can't speak to the evangelical church in other countries, but in the US, this is the history of how it got to where it is. And it's so frustrating and upsetting to read as someone who grew up in that culture, because it's like, oh my goodness, okay, that's why that thing is taught. Here's why we do this way. Here's why this belief is held. When you're stepping away from the evangelical church and you're kind of looking at it all more objectively, so many things are not coming from a biblical place. They are coming from a place of power, a place of fear, just all the things that, again, I don't think true Christianity is about. And so I did finally finish it. It just took me so long to get through it, but it is such an excellent book. I gave it 5 stars. I think if you are a person who also kind of grew up in that culture and is working through those, how you feel about it, pick this up. I think if you're someone who hasn't grown up, in the church and is very frustrated with what you see from it, I would also recommend reading this so that you can see where a lot of these people are coming from. Because at this point, I was raised in this by my parents, who this culture was already so strong and solidified by then, so that was all they'd really ever known. By the time we got to my generation, this was a pretty firmly rooted thing, and so we do kind of have to take the step back to see what happened. So yeah, if you're really frustrated with Christians, potentially Christians, and just politics and the things that they believe, it does not excuse it, I want to make that very clear, but it kind of explains how it got to where it did. It explains why Trump was kind of inevitable in becoming the president, because of where the church was at the time and what they were looking for. And kind of the main ending point of this book is we need to know how we got to this place so that we can try to turn it around. Because I think the origins of the evangelical church were in a good place, and it's just gone so far away from that. And I would love to see it come back to a place that is rooted in love. I would love that. I would love to see a church that is based in that. Just loving your neighbor would be amazing. So yeah, highly, highly recommend. Okay, after that I had another 2-star book. It was Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I think I've reached the conclusion that unfortunately V.E. Schwab is just not for me. I picked up A Darker Shade of Magic either earlier this year, end of last year, and read a couple chapters and just really wasn't vibing with it. And I was like, maybe it was just me at the time. I picked this one up because I needed kind of a quick audiobook, and I was just super bored the whole time. I only finished it because it was so short, and so I just was like, I'll finish it today. It's not a big deal. I'm running errands. But I really did not enjoy it at all. So I gave it 2 stars because I think a lot of it's just me and what I enjoy, and I just don't appreciate her writing style, but I can definitely see how many people would enjoy this. So it's only a 2-star for me. And so if you are a V.E. Schwab fan, kind of a gothic horror fan, this is one for you. It follows our main character, who is a young, I believe she's 12-year-old girl, who has been in an orphanage. She is mute, and she can also see ghosts. And one day she gets a letter from a long-lost uncle saying that he wants her to come back to their family home. And so she goes, and then it becomes very obvious that there's something wrong here, and that maybe there were ulterior motives for bringing her here, which sounds like a book I would absolutely love. And like I said, it just fell flat for me, which is unfortunate. But if that sounds like it's for you and you know that you like V.E. Schwab's writing, I think this would be great. So don't let me dissuade you. If it sounds like a bit of you, pick it up. Another arc that I read was The Empress of Cooke County by Elizabeth Bass Parman, and I thought this was another really great read. This one's also come out because I read it basically about when it came out. This is following a mother and daughter in a small southern town. We have our mother character, who has always, as she's been growing up, she has always thought that she is, I don't want to say worth more, she's always just thought she was better than most people, and that she was destined to kind of be in higher society. She had an affair with a very wealthy, influential man when she was a teen, and she has basically lived the rest of her life scheming on how to get him to divorce his wife and marry her. She kind of believes he is also just waiting for the right time for them to get together. But in the meantime, she did marry someone from their town, and they had their daughter. And so their daughter is now 18, and she is struggling just with, you know, normal beginning of adulthood things, with just normal beginning to be an adult things, coming of age. What does she want to do? Does she want to get married? Does she want to stay in town? And they have very different life paths, but they're both still kind of coming from the same place of, I want something different than from what my life has turned out or is turning out to be. And I thought that it was really, really excellent. I keep describing it as, if you want the feeling of just like a very gossipy small town hair salon, that is this book, because things happen, okay? It's a wild ride. It gets a little crazy, but I think everybody should read it. I thought it was really fun at parts and really tender at parts and really kind of heartbreaking, and just thought it was a really, really good look into how a mother and daughter can have a similar purpose and desire, but just the ways that they go about it are so vastly different. So I would definitely recommend picking this one up if you want some gossipy times. The next book that I read is Happy Hour by Marlowe Granados. I picked this up from Anna's video about like gossipy books, so this was perfect after reading the other one. And this is told in a series of journal entries from our main character. She and her best friend have just moved to New York City. They're very young, they're in their early 20s. They just want to make it work. They just want to live in New York and have fun, but also make money, because you need money. And so it's just a series of journal entries about a summer in New York City and how they're going to make it work, the people that they come in contact with, the jobs that they have, the relationships they're forming. It was a really fun little read. I am going to reread it. I've listened to it actually as an audiobook, and it's one that I want to reread with my eyes, because I do think it will feel differently when I'm actually reading it than listening to it. And I think I'll actually enjoy it even more reading it for myself. So I'm excited to do that at some point. But if you want just kind of a quick read about two young girls living their best young life in New York City, this is the one. I'm going to talk about my next 2-star, just get it out of the way. It was another arc. It's called Guilty Creatures by Mikita Brottman. This is a true crime story about a man who was murdered by his wife and best friend in like early 2000s, I think. That's all it was. It was pretty straightforward. It was fine. If you like true crime, it's probably one you would enjoy. For me, it was just kind of very much, here's the facts. I felt like I could have read a news article and gotten the same thing out of it. So that's that one. But then I read The Hexologists by Josiah Bancroft, and this is a new 5-star for me. I don't know if I've mentioned this. I do not give out 5 stars very often at all. So September was crazy because I actually had another 5-star as well that we'll get to. But 5 stars for me are either, this is like a comfort read that I will pick up anytime, anywhere, and will reread multiple times in my life, or it's like, this was a perfect book for me. That is the case of The Hexologists, because 100% this book is not for everybody. It is not for everybody, but it is perfect for me. We are set in this super intriguing place. It's fantasy. It's not real. It feels kind of Victorian England setting, but we are told the year at one point, and it's 4000 something. So there's also some like technology that's interesting. There is a magic system. Obviously our main characters are hexologists, so the main character is like a person who casts hexes. Her husband doesn't have any magic, but he assists her. They are detectives who kind of solve mysteries. So when we start the book, they are having a visit from the royal secretary, who has let them know that the king has gone mad and he wants to bake himself into a cake and tried to climb into a hot oven. And they've tried everything. They've talked to doctors. They've tried all these remedies. Nothing is happening. And so they think there's potentially a magical element, and that's why they're bringing them in. And they're not really like royalists. They don't really love the Royal Society, but for reasons that they'll get to, they decide to try to figure this out. And it's just a really, really fun romp mystery story. There's a talking dragon, there's wizards, there's alchemists. It was great. The writing style is the main thing that I think will turn people off, because it is so pretentious. It felt like Josiah was like, all right, let's open up that thesaurus and make sure every line has a word that people probably don't know, but I love that. Okay, I loved it. I didn't feel like it was done in a way that's supposed to feel like really intellectually superior. It felt like this is the vibe of this world, okay? You need to just be in this very whimsical, fantastical, sort of over-the-top world, and the writing style to me reflected that. And so I knew it was going to be a 5-star from the first page. It took me 2 weeks to read it just because I didn't want it to end, but it was so good. It was so good, and I hope that it's going to be, it sounds like it's going to be a series, and I am desperately waiting for the next one. Something I want to be sure to mention that was another reason that I liked it is, like I said, the main detective partners are a married couple, and their marriage is so good. They are such a strong, committed, loving married couple, and I feel like so often in books we don't get to see that because the drama and the intrigue kind of comes out of the issues that are happening in the relationship. But they are like the strong thread that is holding this book together. I loved their relationship. I loved how much they love each other in just that, like, you can tell they've been together for a really long time and they are just each other's person. I've been with my husband for over 15 years now, and that's very much what it feels like, is just a, this is my person. We've been together so long. We know what the other person needs. It was great. I loved it. I want more. I'm now going to go read everything else that Josiah Bancroft has written because I cannot wait for the next book. And then I read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. And this one's a little difficult for me to talk about because I did really enjoy it, but I think I had a very different idea in my head of what it was. I have not seen the movie. I do not do horror movies anywhere. I could read a book with some horror, and that's a little different, but I cannot watch a horror movie. But my husband watched it and really liked it, and so he kind of told me all about it because I knew I was never going to watch it. And so I had in my head a very different idea of what this book is, because the book is very different in a lot of ways from the movie, as always happens. And so I think that was just kind of coloring my view of the book a little bit. I was expecting there to be more kind of big moments, and there's really not. It's actually a very quiet book with just some moments of that kind of horror feeling, but it didn't even feel that horror to me. I'm going to be honest here, and maybe I just don't read enough horror. Maybe that is what horror is, but I really didn't think it was too much. So if you're like me and you kind of put it off because you're like, oh, I don't really love horror, maybe give it a try. Is it weird? Absolutely. Absolutely, it's super weird. Definitely on the very weird science fiction side, but I really enjoyed it. And as I kind of have taken some space away from it, I think I enjoy it. Like, the more I think about it, the more I'm liking it, because I've moved away from kind of the view of what I had of the movie in the book. So I'm really enjoying it. I'm excited to read the remainder of the trilogy, but I'm gonna have to wait until later in October because my Everand subscription is doing the thing where it like locks books behind whatever. So I can't get the other two until later in October. I'm excited to read more from Vandermeer. This has me excited. I love finding authors that just kind of have a voice and a style that's very different from anything else. And Jeff is that for sure. I have never read anything like Annihilation. I can say that 100%. So there's that one. I'll probably talk about it more in depth once I read the rest of the Southern Reach series. I'm hoping to be able to finish the next two before the fourth one that he's just announced is coming out, I think this month in October. So I'll kind of probably talk about all of it, the whole series once I've read it, but definitely one I would recommend picking up. My next book is a 5-star, is my next 5-star that I got in October, which is incredible. It was another arc, but it is out now. It came out on October 1st, and it is The City in Glass by Nevo. Guys, have you ever been watching a movie or reading a book or something is happening and you're just loving it so much that you have an ache in your chest? That was me this entire reading experience of this book. It is devastatingly beautiful. I cannot even explain to you how gorgeous and bittersweet this book is. I ate it up. It's pretty short. It's like 200-ish pages. And I'm really struggling on how much to tell you because I just kind of want you to go into it blind and just take it in. But the very, very brief synopsis is that we are following a demon who has kind of taken this town that she found when it was nothing under her wing, and through kind of guiding people and making some choices for people, she's kind of built this city into this hub of art and trade and commerce and beauty and just full of life and people. She's kind of built this up over centuries, and then it is destroyed against her will. And we kind of follow her as she goes through the stages of grief, of grieving all of this, as she starts to try to rebuild the town, as she goes through the feelings of she wants people to come back to her city, but they're not her people. They're not the people that she had before, so she doesn't know if she actually wants them. And it is so... I don't have words to describe how good of a read this was. I just want you to please go pick it up. Please talk to me about it, because I have just been screaming about this on every social media platform since I put it down, because it was so incredible. So please, The City in Glass by Nevo. I did read The Examiner by Janice Hallett. I did actually listen to this one. If you've read Janice Hallett before, it's very similar. It's epistolary. It's told in like forum messages and WhatsApp messages and emails, and it's a mystery about this master's degree course in art that has 6 students in it, and this outside examiner is brought in at the end of the year to kind of grade it and make sure everything is above board. And as he is kind of going through the messages and everything that everything that was turned over to him, he begins to think that one of the students went missing during the course of the year, and the other students are covering it up. That's all you need to know. It's great. There's a twist that I didn't see coming. I never really try to figure out the twist, but this one was like amazing and I loved it. And for sure, if you're a Janice Hallett fan, do it. But I also think this would be a good one to start with if you are a Janice, or if you want to get into Janice Hallett books. I think this would be a good one, and I would recommend the audiobook because it is told with multiple narrators, so it's very easy to keep track of who's who, since this is all told in like written messages. So definitely one that I would recommend. What did I give this one? For 4.25. So yeah, really good one. The next arc that I read was The Oyster Diver's Secret by Carolyn Softstrand. And this is a story about female friendship. It was great. It's about this younger woman, kind of in her mid-30s, who becomes the housekeeper to this woman, probably in her 60s at this point, who 15 years ago was one of the most famous authors in Sweden. And then there was a controversy, and she kind of dropped out of the public eye and hasn't written or really been seen since then. And she is writing a book, but she wants it to be the last book she ever publishes. She wants it to be published after her death. And it's kind of this secret that she has been carrying with her for her entire life, basically. And the introduction of this other woman into her life as her housekeeper is kind of the first real contact that she's had with people in 15 years. And so it kind of opens her up, it opens up this other woman up to the possibilities of what life has to offer when you let other people in, when you are open enough and just willing to kind of let yourself be seen by people. what could come of that, what good could come of that. And it was really great. It was really beautiful. I love that the focus again was on kind of these female friendships, and just how important it is to have really strong friends in our lives that we can count on and can turn to for anything. I thought that was a great message. I really enjoyed it. It was a translated book as well, so I'm always trying to read translated fiction. So love that. I thought the translation was really well done. But definitely one I would recommend if kind of women's contemporary fiction is your thing. This one was quick. I read The Only Living Girl on Earth by Charles Yu. Charles Yu wrote Interior Chinatown, which is another really great book if you haven't read it. This is actually an Everand exclusive book, so he wrote it for Everand, I think, which used to be Scribed and is a book subscription app. And it's super short, 43 pages. The audiobook was around an hour, and it's just a really interesting look into humanity, is what I'm going to say. If you have Everand, go pick it up. I don't want to talk about it too much since I know a lot of people don't, but I enjoyed it. I really like Charles Yu's writing. I think he has a good way of making you think about things in a different way. So try it out if you've got Everand really quick. I read just kind of a fun book called The Whimsy Witch Who Wasn't by Donna Augustine. This is on Kindle Unlimited, and it's about this witch who doesn't know that she's a witch, but she gets kidnapped and kind of brought into the magical realm, and she finds someone who's going to help her get back to the real world and back to her life if she helps him with this thing that she needs done. But she doesn't understand her magic, she can't control it, so the book is basically a lot of them working together, trying to figure that out. It's a slow burn romance. I think there's like 4 in the series. You can tell where it's going, but it didn't get there in this book really, so if that sounds like it's something for you, go for it. Just kind of a fun, quick little palate cleanser. I listened to The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Catherine Arden, and I kind of went into this one not knowing if I would like it or not, because sometimes historical fiction doesn't quite work for me, and I really don't like World War II settings in books. But this one is set in World War I. Oh no, so different. But I think, I don't want this to be a spoiler. I don't think it's a spoiler. It is set in the midst of World War I. And the way that she talks about the war, I think, is really important. It's very clear that the war is very front and center for a lot of people, and that this is a life-changing event for the world, first of all, but also just for individuals, for families. And I just like how she went about it. There's an author's note at the end, and she talks about how we don't have as many stories about World War I. It seems like a lot of historical fiction is focused on World War II, but World War I was so critical for a lot of the technological advances that we made around that time, medical advances, so many things that happened. So I really actually enjoyed that. Again, I didn't know if I would because I don't love a war-centered story, but I really liked how she approached it. And then the main plot of this book is our main character, who has been a nurse kind of in the front lines, but she was wounded, and so she's gone back home. But there's an accident in her home. She lost her parents, and she's grieving this when she gets kind of the package and the notification that her brother is missing in the war. He was a soldier in the war. But it seems kind of suspicious because he's missing, but she has his jacket, she has his dog tags, she has both dog tags, even the one that's supposed to stay with the body. And so she just can't quite convince herself that he's dead. She thinks that he's just missing, but she tells herself he's probably gone. She just needs to go back over there and find out what happened to him. And so that's kind of the book, is her going back over to France from Canada to try to figure out what happened to her brother. And there's a magical realism element to this that is really lovely, but also pretty spooky. Definitely has some very like gothic vibes to it. And I just want everybody to read this. It's again one of those that it's like, oh, I don't want to tell you that though, because then when that comes up in the book, you're like, oh, that's so crazy, that's so great. So yeah, tricky. tricky to talk about, but I'm sure you've seen so many other people talk about it. I don't think I've seen anybody who hasn't enjoyed it. So if it's been on your radar, you've been thinking about it, you're not sure if you want a war setting book, try it out. Then I read The Colony Club by Shelley Noble. This is a fictionalized version of an actual event. So the Colony Club is the first women's club that was created exclusively for women. It was created in New York City in the early 1900s. This is the fictionalized story of kind of how that came about and the women that were involved in it. So we have two people who were actually involved. We have the main society woman who kind of came up with the idea, really spearheaded like the funding, the building, and the creation of this. You have the interior designer, who I think is now called like the first female interior decorator, at least in America, potentially the world, I don't know, but at least in the US. There's a fictionalized woman who is a female architect that came and worked on the project. And we're just kind of seeing how these women are all coming together. It is very much focused on women and what women can do when they are given the space for that, but it's also about the struggle that women have had and still have working in these very male-dominated industries, and just they're not taken seriously, they're not given the respect, and I really enjoyed the discussions on that one. It's a pretty simple premise. There's some intrigue at the end a little bit, but I really enjoyed it. If you like historical fiction, and especially if you really kind of enjoy that Gilded Age, early 1900s New York City, definitely one you should pick up. Two more, we're almost there. Last arc that I read in September is a middle grade book called The Last Hope School for Magical Delinquents by Nikki Pau Preto. This was just what, I think this is a perfect example of what middle grade should be. It was so good. It was fun. It had kind of a magical school setting, which is always great. You could tell there was inspiration from other books about magical schools, but also a lot of originality. There's the magic system, I think, is really interesting and unique. The world is very interesting, how they go about it, and just really enjoyed how the story came about. We follow our main girl who has been bounced around from magical school to magical school, really because she cannot control her magic. She's never really figured out which section of magic she belongs in. She doesn't know how to control it. She just has these outbursts that can be really destructive. And so when we meet her, there has just been she's caused an explosion, basically, in the school gym. And so this is like the last school that she could go to, and so she is sent to the Last Hope School for Magical Delinquents. And of course, she assumes this is going to last about as long as all the other schools have. She's very closed off. She doesn't want to make friends. She doesn't want to get to know anybody because she's only going to be here for a couple of weeks, you know. But then she gets there, and this school is different. They seem to want people to try using their magic and not kind of keeping it controlled and under wraps. They seem to want people to experiment with different things, and the headmistress is very intrigued about her magic and is trying to help her figure out how to control it. And it was great. I loved every single thing about it. It's going to be a series, which I am so excited about. But again, I think this is a perfect example of what middle grade should be for, because there's also some bigger, more mature themes that this book talks about, but in a really accessible way for middle grade readers to kind of start having conversations about them. So if you love middle grade, pick it up, but definitely if you have a middle grade reader, I think this is one you should get for them. It was excellent. I cannot wait for more in this series. Last book, we're almost there. Here we go. I read, my last book of the month was Polite Calamities by Jennifer Gold. I did listen to this as well. This is a historical fiction set in the 1960s in, I want to say Newport, but like one of those very wealthy kind of summer home places. And we follow three different women. We follow our main character who didn't grow up in these kind of wealthy families. She married into it, and she doesn't fit in. Nobody wants her to fit in. They kind of want her to leave. Her husband has just died, leaving her as a widow, and so now she's doubly unsure about how to fit into this community because she doesn't have the buffer of him any longer. And so she's just struggling to figure out how to have connection now that her husband is gone. She meets a young artist and they end up becoming roommates. She kind of takes this artist under her wing, wants to have her have the space to create and to paint again. And of course, this artist has a secret that is kind of holding her back from creating and also keeping her from being able to really open up and form those connections with people as well. And then outside of those two, we're following one of the wives who has grown up in these wealthy families, and she does not like our first main character. She thinks she needs to go. She thinks she is the worst example and influence for their community, and she's going through a hard time. She is getting divorced. She's potentially going to lose her daughter, and she takes a lot of this anger out on this other woman. And so it's just kind of a summer book following these three women across this one summer as they kind of, their stories intertwine and what happens, which is alluded to in the beginning, but I don't want to say it just in case. I think this was a good read. I really enjoyed, again, there's sort of a thread of like female friendship throughout the books that I read this month, and that's very much what this one was about as well, is just how women... Sorry, hopefully that's the last time this angle changes, but my battery died because I probably am talking more than I said I was going to. So I'm not sure where I left off, but I think I was talking about the importance of female friendships, how important it is for women to have other women in their lives that they can be really open and honest with about everything they're going through, the hard things they're going through, the good things they're going through. That was the main driving force of this book, is just what women need to do. Really, it's more like what women do to try to hold on to those friendships, even if that is not how that relationship should be handled. So overall, really enjoyed it. I wish I had read it a little bit sooner because it is a perfect summer read. It feels now, well, I don't know, it's 91 degrees here today in October, so you could probably still get away with reading it, but definitely feels like a summer read if you just want that feeling of like Martha's Vineyard, Newport, just on the like summer on the beach, surrounded by rich people. If that's the vibe of a book you want, it is this book. Okay, we made it, guys. Those were all 26 books that I read in September. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening to me blabber on about all of these books. If you've read any of these and hated them, loved them, I want to know. Tell me in the comments. Are there any that you're going to pick up after this video? I would also like to know that. Again, if you are not someone who comments, I am not really either. So I just appreciate you coming and watching and choosing to spend your time with me. I really, really appreciate it. So I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and that your next book is a 5-star.